Hello garden people! Welcome back out to the garden. It is October 7th, I think. What is the 8th? Early October. It's early October here at the garden, so I was looking at what the last video that was actually posted on the channel, and it looked like it was from July. So obviously some things have changed. We're just right around the first frost. This week is actually relatively warm, but last week it was down right around the 30s. So within the next week or so, we should have our first frost of the season. So how has the garden changed? What worked? What didn't work? We'll walk through that. The first thing you might see as soon as you walk in is I've done a complete overhaul of the center of the garden. So this is sort of the meadow area of the food forest where we'll be growing a lot of annual vegetables. Keep in mind that as the trees start to age and lose their leaves, there's a lot of things that I'm waiting to cut until it actually goes dormant. So when we get over to the peach tree, we'll talk about that. It needs some heavy pruning. So this year in Iowa, you may or may not know that we had the derecho storm, which was very strong easterly winds. So sort of like a tornado, but just in one direction. It moved really quickly. And I was actually out here at the garden as it was coming in because I was a little bit stupid and I ignored the sirens going off. So I think I have a video of the sky right before it started. I'll insert that. But as soon as the storm was done, I came back, and there's one thing that I had to do right away because the wind was still blowing. And so I cut a pretty significant portion off this plum tree because it was actually starting to lean with the wind and it looked like it was about to be uprooted. And so to save the overall plum tree, I cut probably 2/3, at least half of its foliage because it was sort of dominated in this direction. And so this winter I'll clean up some of these lower branches and do some more reshaping and stuff to try to get a better shape of this tree. On the plus side, the trees in this garden try to grow south just because there's most of the exposure is coming from that direction. And so this might end up balancing the tree out over time. I've also redone this in part because the trellis over here was probably the main casualty of the derecho, where I had tomatoes. You can actually still see a few tomatoes from where I just took the vine off. But the trellis here lifted up completely and fell over. So I let it go for most of the rest of the season and harvested some more squash, a few potatoes in this region. But then I was trying to maximize more of the central meadow, so I took out the trellis here and the trellis over there to open up the center area. So that was the beginning part, or the between the season we had the derecho. The other thing was the peach tree. So the peach tree shaped up to be the biggest star of the season, and mostly was. I made a couple mistakes. The first was I probably should have thinned out some of the peaches. I knew this was a possibility, but I thought I would just let the tree do it. I lost some branches, including the ones in the last video that I thought because of the nice crotch angle wouldn't break, actually was too heavy. There was so much fruit that actually broke the branch off. Which wasn't a complete loss because, yeah, actually let's try to walk over to get a better view. At this point I've actually removed those two branches, but you can see, and then I also should have picked the peaches earlier. I was hoping to have them totally ripen on the tree, but the problem with that is the raccoons will eat it right before you want to. And so I lost a lot of fruit to the raccoons. A little bit I don't actually mind, like, you know, you're sharing with nature, but one of the problems is the raccoons are so heavy that at the top of the tree you can see branches that they climbed up and broke. And so I've already removed two of these branches. This one will come off in fall, or like in winter when it takes all of the metal ions used as the antenna pigments in the chlorophyll complexes, and also all the sugars when it draws that down into the roots. At that point, when it's dormant, I'll cut it off here, or cut it off somewhere. Because although it's a nice branch and it produced a ton of fruit this year, it makes it hard to walk. So we'll have to do that. I'm not totally sure the shape, trying to salvage this tree, what I'll do. It'll be a work in progress. I'll probably do some sort of cutting at top to get rid of some of that those scraggly branches. And I'm presuming that it should send some new growth from the actual trunk itself. That's the hope. I've never tried to like salvage a tree like this. The overall tree itself is quite healthy, but it definitely got quite mangled. And you can see, compare it to this other peach tree, this is a more classic. This is sort of where that peach tree was either last year or the year before. Just a beautiful specimen. So it went from being the most beautiful tree in the garden to still the most productive, but definitely a little mangled from a little worse for the wear of this growing season. Other than that, the cherry tree pulled through. It always gets the most damage from the Japanese beetles. I'm not totally sure why that is. They're gone at this point, but they always leave their mark. You know, at this time of year, you just kind of walk through the garden and where you see seeds, for example, if you want to try to save some seeds of the parsley. You know, I'll save some seeds of parsley. I can spread the bergamot. I've propagated a lot of walking onions. So one of the things that I'm looking forward to in the future years is actually continuing with walking onions. I'm a huge fan. I think as a commercial grower, you'll need to grow like regular onions as well, just because the consumers typically want a fairly large onion. But I don't think you could beat the ease and convenience of a walking onion, where the actual stem puts off more onions that you can go and propagate again. So this was a sort of, one of the things I did was take out these strawberries that were in the garden that were sort of subpar. I've got a variety of strawberries in the garden. I've got June bearing, I've got ever bearing, I've got daylight neutral, and I think these must have been a variety of daylight neutral and or wild strawberries, but they're really bad. They were kind of spongy and small, but they also spread the most quickly. Because they put so little effort into their fruit, they sent a lot of stolons out. And so these beds were just totally full of them. And this is probably still one of them here, but I took out a bunch of them and then repurposed it for walking onions. And I'm also doing some trials with garlic. So here's a couple garlics coming in. The conventional advice is that you shouldn't plant garlic until October or even like late October here. I think that's largely false because there seems to be a common thing said without any evidence. And I have seen some evidence of growers saying they planted it earlier in September and had success with the bulbs. So I've gone ahead and done that because I like planting things when I've had time. So I've done that already. But other than that, the corn cage. So my big plan for the year was growing corn in a completely raccoon-proof cage. And it was raccoon-proof, but it had a variety of other problems. One of them was that I tried to grow so many other things around the cage, like using the side walls as trellises. You can still see some of these grapes, tomatoes. They're Texas currant tomatoes. And they're really good. I like these little red tomatoes. They're smaller than a grape tomato. They're currant size. So there was even more foliage than this. I've actually pulled off a couple of the plants. And it created such a humid microclimate that all of the corn got smut. Now, smut is huelacoche in Spanish, or like in Spanish cuisine or Mexican cuisine. I didn't eat it because I caught it kind of late, so it looked gross, but supposedly it's really tasty. So maybe if you were trying to get huelacoche, this might be a strategy where you'd grow it in a dense, somewhat shielded, humid microclimate. Also, in addition to the like the fungus, the corn smut growing on the corn, the squinnies, the chipmunks can still get inside of this cage. So the chicken wire is not thin enough to keep out the voles and the chipmunks, I think was the biggest problem. So they ate most of the corn. So the corn was a complete bust, but it does not mean the overall cage was a complete bust. On the sides over here, you can see the Appios americana, and it goes all the way around. And I actually just noticed some on the top center. I don't know if you can see it underneath this kind of window monstrosity that I put out of the way. It's actually flowering. And I don't know if this is really late for it to be flowering or if that'll actually set seed this year. But it's grown quite well, so I'm confident it'll come back. And then on the far wall, there's Chinese yam. So it's a different vine species, more like heart-shaped leaves, which is these are more compound. So both of these vining tuberous crops have actually done quite well. So, I'll give it overall success. I've gone ahead and laid a lot of comfrey and compost on the ground, cut out all the corn, not tilled or anything, just cut it at the ground and then laid a bunch of leaves and compost to hopefully improve the soil in the center for next year. So, not totally sure what I want to do. Probably not grow corn in it, unless I'm specifically trying to get corn smut. Kind of a fun time of the year where we have the Mexican sunflowers coming in. So they're starting to fade. Oh yeah, you can see when they first come in, the color on them is just intense. And I think part of that is they're very mildly fuzzy, and so it bends the light in unique ways. And we also have the Jerusalem artichokes. I think I actually have two different varieties of Jerusalem artichokes just based on the tubers and the way they grow. But these are triploid crosses between two different varieties of perennial sunflowers that the Native Americans actually created. And it's one of the ways we've tracked their movements around the country is the trading networks of these tubers. I would like to eat them more. I mostly just use them for late season flowers because they're good for pollinators. But over that, I'm going to start moving into, once the trees drop their leaves, it's time for training branches, time for pruning. I really like pruning because I think it feels artsy to me. It feels like a fun, almost craft to do. But the apple trees grew well, the apricot tree grew well. It was a really dry summer, We didn't have much rain at all. I think most of the state of Iowa was in pretty severe drought. But that said, I didn't water the garden at all. I think I only lost one thing, which was a propagated currant that was new this year, and I never watered it, so then it died. But other than that, all the established things did just fine. And so they're doing well. The red raspberries are still coming in, so there's a few of those trickling along. The currant's really good. The grape harvest this year was amazing. It was the first year that I didn't have much black rot because it was so dry that it was more like a California or Mediterranean climate, whereas usually it's pretty humid here. And so we get a lot of fungal problems. But there was no fungal problems this year, almost none. So I got a lot of grapes off the vines, which was really fun. It was the first year for that. Yeah, so there's not too much. The peppers have done okay. This is a habanero plant. Beautiful. It actually only started putting peppers on about 2 weeks ago. And I harvested a lot because I've been lacto fermenting. And so I've made some hot sauces. And so I picked them. So there's not really any big peppers left because I just harvested all of them. Also, this that I was trying to use for honeyberry propagation has largely just been a pepper incubator this summer. I picked a bunch of these a few days ago as well. So you can see a couple peppers coming back. Now, I also found a special on more honeyberry plants. So these are more tundra, which is the same variety you have behind you. So this is a tundra honeyberry. So it's not a variety I actually need in the garden, but it was a really good deal. It was closed out for like $5 a plant, so can't argue with that. We'll see what I'm going to do with the box. I might try to sow or transplant some of the kales in there, but it's been an interesting experience. I'll try to do more with cold framing in the future. You can see the rhubarb has come in really well. It kind of died out in the middle of the season and then came back with another flush of leaves. So I think this should be really good. Should have a good harvest next year. This other apricot tree is doing well. I need to get in here. So one of the problems with compact gardening is that walkways do get overgrown. And that's just kind of something you have to keep in mind when you're planning out, but also emotionally just recognize there's a seasonality to it. So as we get the first frosts, as the fall's been going on, I've been reclaiming more and more of the garden, which is a process I go through every year. And you can see, especially with the raspberries, these Bristol black raspberries, and with the blackberries over there, it's going to be a little bit of a nasty tussle to get in there. But I should also be able to propagate them, because when they stick their heads down into this wood chip, the very humic rich substrate, they'll put roots out, and I can just either cut it up top and then dig it up and plant it, or pull the plant out and replant it somewhere else. So it's a really easy way to propagate plants. In fact, it's very hard to stop it. I have done a little bit of it intentionally. I don't know if you can tell the pot with the bricks in there. I've actually trained a couple of the canes to go into the soil in this pot. So when I'm ready to propagate it, I'll just cut the plant and pull that out. But there's also, it's just doing it in the path over there. And you can see, this is sort of my makeshift nursery. There's some like asparagus, and these are some hazelnuts. I don't know if you've ever seen a hazelnut in fall, but it can get this really nice red color. There's some more of these chestnut trees that I've been putting in at my parents' place, my girlfriend's family's place. These are some currants or jostaberries that